Hello, everybody. I am Cass with College of Lore.
And I am.
What? Hey, did you forget your name again?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Back at it again with the Penitent forgetting her name.
And I am the Penitent with College of
I
Lore.
believe in you. You can do it this time. Yeah, hi.
I'm not very smart.
You are very smart. You had one silly moment. Anyway, we're here with this episode of the Academy. Today we're going to talk about overpowered characters, and how to make them functional in your game. In theory, there may not always be a way to make this work, but there are a lot of ways to make it work.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that today.
So a lot of DMs would outright tell you, don't.
Yeah. We're here to tell you that if you have decent players, you don't have to say no. If you handle it appropriately and your player or players handle it appropriately, it does not have to be impossible.
And this is why it's good to have a session 0.
Yep.
One of the reasons.
Check out our session 0 video.
Because not only do you as a DM have to be okay with it, and your players as a group have to be okay with it, and the player have to be okay with it, your other players need to be okay with it.
Yeah. So, as we kind of get into this, our last video was on gods. We're going to talk about demigods some in this one. Like I just said, go check out our session 0 video. This is kind of an expansion on a lot of other things we've kind of touched on before. Before we go into this, do make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel because we talk about a lot of cool stuff on here. We have way more cool stuff coming up, and I want you all to be able to see it, so remember to subscribe.
Yeah, check out our Patreon.
Yep.
Click on the bell and like this video.
You can follow her on Twitter, you can follow the main Twitter on Twitter, although I run it and I never post anything, and I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm terrible with social media, which is why I don't have my own Twitter.
Follow our main channel Twitter for some video announcements, and follow my Twitter for political hot takes.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna get into this. So, I guess the first thing that we're gonna hit on is the things that are kind of typical things that make a character overpowered. If you're following our actual play on our actual play channel, you will know that there is a demigod character in that, and there's also a character who was a very high-ranking member of a very powerful organization, and that is only some of the kinds of things that we have run in various games in the past. So magic power, stuff like demigods, stuff like vampires is another one. People with very powerful patrons is another one, or very deep, close connections to a god. Physical power, stuff like dragons, giants, werewolves, anything that can transform into something stronger.
Yeah, physical power is one of the really big ones that players will immediately be drawn to. And, especially if, like, you're running something like Storm King's Thunder, or Horde of the Dragon Queen.
Yeah.
And
it makes sense that your players might be drawn to a character that kind of ties very heavily into that, which gets a little complicated.
Yes.
There's also political power, being a noble or a royalty even, just having a lot of money, being a very powerful household name or a very powerful politician kind of family.
Having that sway, that influence.
And the non-political status, which obviously one of the characters in our actual play had that for going for her for a while. Someone who was in the military, someone who was very high-ranking in an organization, whether that be something like a Bloodhunter Order or a temple, something like a very prominent faction like the Harpers or Order of the Gauntlet or the Zentarum or something like that.
Or any faction listed in our top 10
Yeah, go check out our top 10 factions
video.
Anyway, anyone who has a lot of power or had a lot of power, and there are obviously a lot of ways to have that kind of power, and many players are drawn to that kind of power, not even necessarily out of malice or intent to disrupt things. They just think it's cool. A lot of people want to be... It's fantasy, and you want to be cool, and you want to be important.
Yeah, there's this belief that it makes you a bad player if you want to play an overpowered character.
It doesn't make you a bad player, it just means that you need to have some negotiating done and kind of think through the logistics.
Yeah.
Obviously, this sort of thing is the topic of a ton of, like, D&D horror stories. Horror stories for any system, really. But fundamentally, they do not have to be horrible. And we have kind of come up with some ways to mechanize some things. Fundamentally, people want to play this because it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool in combat. For a lot of people, it's cooler in the roleplay sector of things, and it comes with a ton of interesting story beats, especially if you're playing a module or a kind of campaign where whatever this player or these players want to be could tie in heavily to the setting and the story. Like with Horde of the Dragon Queen and being a dragon, or Storm King's Thunder being a giant or half-giant or something like that.
Yeah. And, there are some people that want to play a dragon, so they can turn into a horrible beast and just wreck all of the opponents possible.
Yeah.
And that's me you can't really allow, but if someone wants to play a dragon because, like, hey, I am a dragon in human guise because this setting has dragons that are hunted, for example. That can be really cool.
Yeah, and you can do a lot with that. So that kind of touches on the next point. Allowing this is obviously a risk. This is always going to be a risk. You can allow really whatever you want in your game. So basically the answer to should you allow this is yes, but also no, but also yes.
Yes.
You need to do some negotiating, you need to do some tweaking and some kind of pre-planning to make sure everything's going to be relatively balanced and relatively fair. The other thing you need to do is make sure everyone else in the game is on board. It is very easy, if you're doing this sort of thing, for another player or multiple other players to feel overshadowed or irrelevant or underpowered in the grand scheme of the game.
And don't ask them in the, ask in session 0, but send a message after or before and say, are you sure you're okay with this? Did you feel comfortable saying at the time that you were okay with it?
Was that a conversation you felt fully comfortable in? Yeah. And that's something your table should probably be able to do with each other, is comfortably say, I don't know how I feel about this, can we tweak this in some way?
Yeah, this is probably not the thing to do with a group of strangers or a group meeting for the first time.
Definitely not. This is the kind of thing that works way better with people who know each other, who can trust each other to work. This is not one of those things that will work with power gamers.
No.
Because they will always be trying to find ways to exploit it. So power gamers and other people who are that kind of player who will abuse power they are given or find loopholes all the time, you need to be sure that whoever you're playing with who's doing this can be trusted to not screw you over with it.
The way we run demigods, there is no reason, if you're a power gamer, if you're interested in winning, for your action in a turn to be anything other than trying to roll a percentile to kill.
Yeah.
The big
like insta-kill everybody,
Yeah. There is no reason to do anything else if you're trying to power game. So this is more roleplay heavy.
Yeah. And so, you as a DM, you can set limitations on that. You can say, like Divine Intervention, you can only use this power so many times because you haven't fully attuned to it yet. Or you can say, this power comes from a godly parent. You can say, if you exploit their abilities too much, they're going to cut you off. Which can be interesting narratively if that's a narrative arc your player wants to explore. But fundamentally, you've got to make sure they're not going to abuse that sort of ability, or if it's something like political power or especially financial power, they're not going to write blank checks for whatever they want all the time. And certainly not without consequences. We've played a game. I have a character who is from a very wealthy family who hashes in that sort of ability exactly once and fully understands that there will be hell to pay for doing so.
Yeah.
It is, in the moment, it is worth it to her to cash in that family money to get something very important. That is also, I am a player who tries very hard not to abuse these sort of things. She is a character who doesn't like to flaunt that sort of thing. And she would only ever use it because she hates her family. She would only ever use it in a dire scenario, and it was a dire scenario.
And that actually created a story arc.
It did, yeah. No, that created a whole thing. You know, she got in trouble with her family for that, and things kind of spiraled downhill from there. It was a necessary action, and it got her in a lot of trouble, and she was prepared for the consequences of that. But if your players are gonna spend money willy-nilly and just kind of go crazy, dropping cash on whatever they want, you know, that's not the kind of player you want to give this sort of ability to. So you need a responsible player who is willing to also adapt if you realize something isn't working for your table. And you also need an understanding table who is willing to cooperate and collaborate on making things work. And as a DM, it is extra work.
Yes.
You're going to have to keep track of some extra stuff. Obviously, I am DMing the actual play, and sometimes I gotta figure out, like, man, what's reasonable here? And figuring that out in the moment, if someone rolls something, is a little rough.
Yeah.
There was a scene in one of the earlier episodes, I believe episode 6 of the actual play, where the demigod rolled percentile in a kind of dire moment, and I was like, oh god, what do I give her? Because she rolled successfully. And I was like, okay, what can I throw in right this second to change this scene in a way that fixes the problem?
Without Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, without fixing everything, because we're running through Curse of Strahd, and I was like, okay, what can I do with this short of murdering Strahd on the spot? And I figured it out, but it is extra work and it's extra thought that you have to put into things. So if you don't feel equipped to do that, you can always say no. The big key here is, as a player, understand that it might not always get you a yes, and as a DM, understand that you are allowed to say no if you don't think it's something you or the rest of the table can handle.
Yes, and again, please try to do this with players you trust more than...
Unless your whole party entirely just wants to be, like, go crazy on this sort of thing and just wreak havoc, and it's like a one-shot, or it's the kind of campaign you genuinely want to run and everyone wants to play in, where everyone's just broken and overpowered and realistically should not be half as strong as they are. If that's the game you want to play, go for it, but otherwise you really have to negotiate this down.
Yes.
So another thing I want to talk about is kind of balancing, especially at lower levels. So none of this has to be a thing you can only do at high level. You need to be really careful with balancing if you're starting at level 1 or 3 or whatever. This video, kind of the point of this video is to justify lower level characters having cool stuff they can do that should be exclusive to someone higher level.
Yeah.
So even if someone realistically should be really strong and really high level, come up with a reason why they can't be. There are a lot of ways to do that. One of the characters in the actual play is a great example. She had a very long history with the Zentarum. Spoilers.
Yes.
And she was very powerful and very skilled at what she did when she was with them. But she was a non-combat member of the Order. She was a non-combat member of the organization, and even though she was able to transfer some of those skills into current spells, such as things like Cause Fear, which is a spell that she has on her spell list that she uses for intimidation factor both in and out of combat, especially out of combat, because that's how her character works. Another spell that she has is Gift of Gab, which she uses for similar things. Not all of that is a skill that translates. She is a wizard, but the majority of what she did was non-combat oriented, and so starting in a world where she needs to use combat skills leaves her with a lot to be desired, so that's kind of how you can work in a very powerful, very old, experienced character having to relearn a lot of things, basically. Obviously, there are a lot of different categories of this sort of thing. Physical strength, magic power, political power, some other kind of status, we went over all of that. And there are different ways to handle all of that sort of thing. So kind of to touch on each of those categories, physically strong characters, you have to limit when and how they can use it, is the big thing. And that's the big thing with all of this, really.
Another thing I will say, just circling back briefly to the idea of characters having these things and then not being overleveled.
Yeah.
A really good thing that I've liked to run before is having a character that is formerly had this high rank, high power, but has been reincarnated since.
Yeah, or has otherwise been stripped of power.
Yes. One of the ones that I ran was a character who, very high-level adventurer, who basically fell into a time hole and was reverted to their, like, teenage self.
Yeah. You can do a lot of stuff. Maybe someone who is a very powerful member of an evil organization, kind of like the Zentarum, and who were stripped of their powers, maybe even their memories, or something like that, and is now having to relearn how to do everything they knew how to do before. You can also do that, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, you can do that with injuries, too.
Yes.
Someone who is a war vet might have been seriously disabled, and now they're out of physical therapy, they're out of rehabilitation, they can move again, but they have to learn how to fight in an entirely different way and relearn all that muscle memory because their body moves differently now. Or they get an amputation, or use a combat wheelchair, which I think is a great thing that Wizards created. There's a ton of cool stuff you can do with it, but you should always have a reason why they're not as strong as they should be.
Yeah, one of the things you'll hear other people say a lot is to not make your characters, to not make level 1 characters have higher level backstories.
Yeah. You can do that, you just have to give them a reason why they've reverted.
Yes.
And that's where something like limiting their access to physical power comes in, for example. Like, we'll use a dragon as an example. It's probably the best example. Dragons are, in most settings, able to take a human or mortal in general guise, restrict that form. Maybe as they're younger and they spend so much time in this mortal form trying to hide, they would need to warm up to transforming more frequently, and maybe at a higher level they unlock more of that ability, but at a low level they can only transform for a very short amount of time, very draining, impossible to do for very long, and it would only really be usable in an absolute last-case scenario because they maybe don't want to be found out as a dragon or something like that.
And the idea that I've had before, like, for a dragon PC, is that the transformation takes a lot of energy and a lot of calories.
Yeah, a lot of recovery, too.
Yes.
All of those things.
So I think I ruled that once you transform, you can't transform again for, I think it was...
Was it 30 days?
I think it was 4d10.
Yeah, 4d10 days, yeah.
Or 3d10 plus 10.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So, yeah, it's one of those things you can restrict mechanically, fairly easily. It obviously would take a lot of energy for someone who basically never spends time in a draconic form to suddenly use all of that power in a massive burst. They would be exhausted, they would be extremely drained, it would consume a lot of their physical energy, and they would probably drop unconscious when they turned back due to the extreme exertion of that without being in the habit of it. So that's a great way to kind of restrict that, and again, you can restrict something with a storyline reason, like dragons are hunted nearly to extinction, and showing that you are a dragon is extremely risky, so you would only do it in an absolute worst-case scenario. Something like that.
Yes.
Another thing you can do kind of narratively, lack of control, something like a werewolf, where they can transform, but it's out of their control, or they're uncontrollable during the transformation, so it's a huge risk.
Or even a blood frenzy for a vampire.
Yeah. And alternatively, there are things that don't transform, stuff like giants and half-giants and stuff. You kind of have to scale down narratively. Even a giant who has a lot of physical power, if you want to homebrew a giant race and say their strength can be a little higher, cool, that's something you can do, but then narratively, one, you have to explain why they're not murdered on sight, so they have to be very restrictive with how they use that sort of thing, and two, they're not going to be very powerful story-wise, and again, they're kind of going to be a threat. They're going to be viewed as a threat, so they have to make themselves continually very non-threatening, which means not using that full power in most cases. So that's a narrative way that you can kind of restrict that sort of thing, because otherwise it's going to go a little haywire. So if they're trying to protect a village, but there's this giant in the group, how can they trust, especially if you're running a module like Storm King's Thunder, that this giant isn't going to suddenly turn on you? So you have to kind of be very careful with how you use that power.
And again, sometimes it's narrative reasons, like, should this giant be doing more damage? Probably.
Yeah. But sometimes you just gotta suck it up.
Yeah, but this exists for roleplay reasons and largely like character interaction reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Roleplay is your friend in this whole thing. You want to do a lot of this for flavor and for interesting interactions. This is the kind of thing that you should definitely do at a more roleplay-heavy table.
Yes.
Like we said. But there are ways to make everything feel powerful without being constantly game-breaking. A little bit of game-breaking is okay if everyone at the table is okay with it, but you gotta have the right timing and only use it very sparingly, and for interesting story beats. So to touch on kind of the next category, the magic power, demigods is the big one. We love playing demigods. We have a bunch of demigod characters, both of us. I will just run through very quickly what I do. Godly magic, miracle magic is basically run like divine intervention, the cleric ability.
To a degree of success, you know, something truly miraculous would be a 1.
Like a 1 or a 2 at most, yeah. And you can kind of scale it up and down. Something at the kind of level that divine intervention normally gives you, I set it as like a 10 or lower. There are things that you could probably, you know, if you're teleporting across a room to show off, you could make that like a 50 or lower, or even like a 75 or lower. If it's something really simple that uses magic that you already have a lot of experience with, something like teleporting, or one of our characters is a demigod of Talos, one of your characters.
Yes.
And she likes to mess with the weather a little bit, to kind of intimidate people, which is a role. It's a relatively simple roll comparatively because it doesn't actually do any damage, and it makes sense for her to be able to do it frequently. The most that really comes in for is an intimidation check.
Yeah, functionally what it does is it gives advantage on intimidation if it works out.
If it works. And if it doesn't work, you know, that can also have narrative consequences, like someone not buying it.
Yeah, disadvantage.
Yeah. If it works, great, you get advantage. If it doesn't work, people are going to laugh at you and think you're calling bullshit. So the magic should be hard to consistently work with, hard to consistently get. So you kind of scale that D100 system up and down. DM discretion really is how it works, but the harder something would be to do normally, the harder it should be to roll for, fundamentally. And the less that character has done it, the harder it should be. Because, again, someone doing something like teleporting around for fun is one thing, or calling like a cloud over your head is one thing. Summoning a spider if you're a demigod of Lolth, just like conjuring a bunch of spiders to show up, that's one thing, for an intimidation check or something like that. But turning into this giant spider that can wreak havoc on a city is not something a character does very often, so that would be very difficult, both to attain normally and to do for the first time.
Yeah, there are some little miracles you theoretically shouldn't even have to roll for.
Yeah, there's some stuff you should, honestly, if you're able to do this, if you're planning on doing this already, especially with something like a demigod, just do it. There's some really small things that are just flavor. Let it happen. You know, if someone wants to, like that character, conjure a shower of sparks from her hand. That's not hard. You can do that with a cantrip. Let it happen. But that should always be hard to get consistently. There are also a lot of good narrative reasons for that. Having a strained relationship with your deific parent. Having not been able to have access to your magic for a very long time. Either if you're older and have been restricted from using it by a god, or if you're younger and didn't know you were a demigod until recently and you don't know how to use your powers. There's a lot of ways to make it work. Obviously, that's not the only magical thing. You know, you can have someone who was a very powerful spellcaster. Again, what it boils down to is have a good reason for why they have what they have without being busted.
Yes.
A powerful spellcaster might not... You know, they might have started... a powerful wizard might have had their spellbook erased from existence. Had it stripped from them. They may have to literally start copying that from scratch, even if they should know how to do this, because they don't have their tools to do it anymore. Or a warlock who got their bond broken with their patron and now has maybe a new patron, or, you know, has changed classes since that happened. Someone who was a warlock in the past and maybe changed to something else. There are a lot of options.
Amnesia.
For that sort of thing. Amnesia. a cleric changing gods or a paladin changing oaths being an oathbreaker, or the good version of an oathbreaker, which we've homebrewed because goddammit, they should exist. I won't hear anything else about it.
A lich who became a lich via ritual but not necessarily power.
Yeah. There's a ton of stuff you can do narratively. Just have a good reason for why they're not broken when they should be. As far as political power, the easiest thing to do is to take them kind of away from where that influence is. That power, using that has strings that they can pull, but it also has strings that get pulled on them. Maybe if they exert a certain amount of power in a city, all of a sudden they're expected to do a lot of other things in return. If you call in a favor from another noble, you're going to have to pay that favor back. And you don't necessarily know what that might be. There are responsibilities that come with political power. You might be able to set something up, but then you have to manage that thing after, you set up a trade deal, great, okay. But now you're the liaison for that. You're the connection that makes that work, and all of a sudden you have all this responsibility, and you're still adventuring. How are you keeping up with that?
Also, your power isn't power everywhere. Your power means a great deal in cities, but it doesn't perhaps mean the same in an orc kingdom or the Underdark,
or even just another city that, especially if you're not royalty, maybe the nobles there are rival family, and if you try to exert that power in that city, they are gonna either laugh you out or straight up kick you out.
Yeah.
They will at best not take you seriously, and at worst they will forcibly remove you from the city. Money is the other thing. Seriously, don't let your players just write checks. Give them a reason to not be able to. Give them an allowance set by their parents. Hey, you're going adventuring. You need to be responsible. If you're going to learn to be an adventurer, you need to also learn to be responsible with your money. So we're going to give you a very limited amount of what you can use, and if you go over that, there's going to be consequences when you come back. Or we'll cut you off altogether.
Yeah.
Something like that. The two things you can do are give them a narrative reason not to be able to spend money forever on whatever they want, and to not be able to cash in that power and those favors at any time. Limit the places that they go that's useful, and set up complications if they use it. Which is hard to do as a DM, and like I said, this takes a lot of extra work, this is a lot to manage, but if you're planning on running this, that's kind of a thing you're taking on. And as a player, be responsible with it. Maybe there are reasons that you could, in theory, do that, but just don't, to make your team, your party, and your DM's life easier.
Yes.
Don't be a jerk about it, please. And then to touch on non-political status, stuff like organizations or military, stuff like that. I talked about this a little earlier. For a character who is in the military, something like that, an injury is a great way to lower that power level. They can still be respected, they can still be revered even, but they also might not be. They might be ridiculed or made fun of or mocked for a failure in combat that got them injured. There's a lot you can do with that. Fundamentally, they can be respected or not respected, but whatever it is, there needs to be a reason where they're not as capable of fighting as they would have been as, like, a general in the military. Alternatively, for some things, you can either disband an organization if it's something smaller, or even really if it's something big if you want, or give them a reason to turn away from it. That's also something that we're kind of touching on in the actual play now.
Yes.
Giving a reason to separate from the thing that was giving you power before. In the backstory especially.
Walking away from a temple to Lolth, for example.
Yeah. You might have been a very high-ranking cleric to Lolth for a while, or a paladin or whatever, but if you leave, you're certainly getting cut off from that, and now what are you doing with yourself? Do you get picked up by a new god? Do you appeal? Do you change class entirely? If you were a paladin, do you just become a fighter and just try to keep applying that and hope that you figure it out again? And then giving them reasons to question the power they've been given is another one. Where you can... again, that's kind of something we're touching on in the actual play. The realization that not everything is what it was thought to be. Whether that's these people have suddenly been revealed to have done something terrible and you don't want to be associated with them anymore, you might cut ties, you might lose power, or you might forsake power to not be seen as a part of that anymore. there are a ton of options.
Yes.
Really, there's always an option, I think, to kind of work all that out. And so, another thing that I want to kind of touch on, we've gone over, a lot of ways to give people this power, to limit this power. There are some really cool narrative things you can do with that. One of those things is taking power away from that character temporarily. Or permanently, but especially temporarily. Sometimes characters feel like they are who they are because of this sort of ability. To find out who they really are, taking that away is huge. A demigod gets cut off from their godly parent and loses their abilities somehow. The kingdom or the city that your nobility is from gets overthrown, or there's a civil war, or all of a sudden that power is usurped and they have nothing anymore. They could be disowned at some point. Something happens to take that away. That's definitely something you should talk about with your player.
Yes.
Talk about with your DM if you're a player and you're talking to a DM, obviously. Kind of negotiate what you can there. If you're not comfortable with that, you can say no.
Do not spring this on your player.
No, that's mean. That's unfair, especially if you realize you don't know how to run this sort of thing. You can always talk to them about it, but don't just say, screw you, your power's gone because I don't like running this.
They made this concept because they were excited about it, and with someone like the demigod Talos I made, an arc of them losing and regaining their power could be really interesting.
But if that's not what they want, if they're not comfortable with it, and you feel like you're not comfortable running it anymore, you should have thought of that.
Especially, I've heard some DMs who will agree, and then screw the players over. Yeah.
And that's true for some DMs, even without overpowered stuff like this. Some people will just do that with regular stuff, which is even worse. But especially, if you've agreed to do something like this, you gotta stick with it. But yeah, warn your player for this, clear this with your player, but it can be really, really cool narratively. It can be cool for roleplay, it can be cool for character growth. They might initially have a horrible reaction to it, which can be really interesting narratively.
Do you not, in this or any kind of setting, confuse a bad in-character reaction for a bad out-of-character reaction?
Yeah, that's really important. And fundamentally, you should really give them a way to get it back. That can be a character arc for them, it can be a character arc, a story arc for the whole party, but you should give them a way to regain that and get whatever they lost back. Whether that's a demigod getting their powers back, a dragon finding the ability to transform again, nobility suddenly realizing, oh shit, this has changed from us just meandering around in the wilderness killing monsters. Okay, I need to deal with this because this is not just a problem for my family, this is a problem for the whole kingdom. Something like that. Especially in the case of an overthrowing or something like that. But you should give a narrative way to get back what they lose.
Yes.
And then the other thing that's kind of good to hit on is Ascension. A lot of this stuff, eventually someday it's gonna come to a point where they should have all their stuff. They should be what they're meant to be eventually. A dragon being able to transform more, a demigod ascending to godhood, someone who is very high nobility, like a princess becoming the queen, or a prince becoming king, or whatever, what have you. Ideally, that should happen at the end of your campaign, but if something comes up and it doesn't happen that way, you can either remove them from the party or have them be an ally to the party but make a new character. You can do something like that. Fundamentally, if they become too powerful for the setting because of a narrative story arc, you should accept that. If that's an arc that your character, that a DM and a player agree the character has reached, make a new character. Give them, maybe this person suddenly brings someone else into the party. That connection could be used to create a new party member, but it certainly shouldn't be left in if it suddenly becomes entirely too overpowered, to be realistic.
And in fact, if it happens mid-campaign, their godparent dies and they have to take the throne, or their king dies and they have to take the throne, or all these things. You can even give them the option of well, okay, you're at a crossroads now. Do you ascend to godhood, or do you revoke your godhood and become mortal?
Yeah.
To stay with these people?
Yeah. That can be really cool. If the king dies and you're the next in line, you're the heir to the throne, you have a younger sibling, is what you're doing, is a quest that you're on long term, is that more important to you than taking the throne? Would you cede that power to someone who isn't quite as trained for it, or who wasn't intended to have it because you feel like the quest you're on is more important overall?
Yeah.
You can do that. And if you don't do that, give them a fitting send-off, make it matter, make it relevant, and maybe bring it in again, either later in the campaign or even in a future campaign. You reuse that in your setting. Maybe that former royalty, the former princess, is now a queen who's ruled for years, and has either been really good at her job or really bad at it.
Yeah. Word of warning there. Do not ruin someone's character post-campaign.
No.
Like, if this character has been built the whole time, I'm going to be a good queen, I'm going to be awesome at this. Yeah, don't out of nowhere spring your player, oh hey, your queen, your character is now queen, and now she's corrupt and horrible and the big bad.
And if you want to use a player's old character for that, especially if it's a different group, you can say, like, hey, I'm baking this old character into the setting. What are you comfortable with me doing with that, if anything?
Yeah. Our personal homebrew setting is 90% based on old campaigns.
Yeah, we're just pulling a bunch of stuff in and throwing it all together, and we're going to see how it goes. But yeah, you can pull stuff in, especially into extra, like, follow-up campaigns. Critical Role is doing that right now. Not to talk about Critical Role again, but they are doing that right now. They're pulling in some old stuff, because it's connected to some backstories, and I think it's super cool.
One thing I will warn against is with... Oh my god, I lost my point.
It's okay. No brain cells in us today.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, it's late. We're recording this late at night. Our car broke down today.
Yeah.
On the way to, like, recording session.
Yeah.
The car broke down today, so that was rough. We've been going through it.
But we made it.
We made it. We got here. Woo.
Regardless of our personal life problems.
Yeah.
I was thinking, just like, maybe let this change the style of campaign you're running.
Yeah.
Especially the royalty ascension.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe now you are the King's Guard, or
the
King's personal squad, and maybe there's a way that this character can continue. If there is any path to let this character continue,
you should probably
take it, but at some point, something, especially with godhood. Yeah.
Things taper off. But you know what you could do with something like a god is, you bring in a new party member who is a cleric to that god. Or something like that. Which could be really cool.
Yeah.
A cleric who has just recently felt this power shift, especially at a high level cleric or an acolyte who has been one of the first to know that this power has transferred from one version of this god to another, and wants to assist the party who helped that happen. That would be a really cool second character to pull in if something like that happened.
Yeah. There is a character, an NPC, who's almost certainly now the backup character for one of the PCs.
Yeah.
At this point. Connected to that godly connection.
Mm-hmm. Which is super cool. There's a ton of stuff that you can do with that sort of thing. So kind of one of the other things I want to touch on is, what if it goes wrong? What if it's not working? Obviously the first thing you should do is talk about it.
The first thing you should do if anything isn't working in D&D, really,
is talk about it, see if this is resolvable, see if there's something you can do to neutralize whatever upsetness, whatever negative emotion is going on around this, whether it's the party feeling unloved or underappreciated, whether the player doesn't like doing it or doesn't like how it's being done, or if you as a DM just don't feel like it's something you can handle anymore. Obviously, you should try your best to prepare for this sort of thing, but if something comes up and you really don't feel like you're capable of dealing with it anymore, try to have a dialogue about it. Try to see if there's something you can do. See if a temporary debuff, like we were talking about earlier with some kind of story arc, like taking someone's power, if you can negotiate that with a player, see if that can help. If that isn't gonna work, fundamentally, this kind of thing can break a campaign. That's okay. Not every campaign will work out. Most campaigns probably won't work out. Be amicable about it. Keep it open. Keep it understanding. Try to kind of play nice with everybody about it. D&D is meant to be fun. If someone isn't having fun, it shouldn't continue, even if some people want it to. You know, you can always start over. You can use these characters again.
No one goes to D&D looking to have their feelings hurt.
No.
Their characters' feelings hurt, maybe.
Yeah, but not the players, you know. In-character emotion is very different from out-of-character emotion. You know, in-character, your players can be, or your characters can be crushed by something. Out-of-character, your players should be at least vaguely sane about it.
Yeah.
I hope. You know, you can cry during a session, but you don't want someone to be miserable the whole time. Nobody should have hurt feelings. You know, if something needs to end, something needs to end. You might be able to work in an ascendancy and have them play a backup character. Honestly, it might be good to have an idea for a backup character and then tweak that every few levels just in case an ascendancy does happen for a player that's doing this sort of thing. Is maybe something that might work. But yeah, fundamentally, play nice, be nice, try to be respectful of everyone's needs, and if something really isn't working, sometimes just taking that loss and reusing some characters or some ideas in another game is always viable, I think. So that kind of leaves us with kind of a wrap-up for this episode of the Academy. This is definitely a hard topic to address with a table. Like we said, I mean, I'll TLDR this. Talk about it. Keep a dialogue open. Make sure everyone's comfortable with both the character itself and the story beats that character may provide and may be a part of. Make sure that you as a DM can manage it. Make sure your players can manage it, both responsibility-wise and storytelling-wise. Be sure to limit things either narratively or mechanically or both, to keep things from being too game-breakingly miserable. This can be really fun.
Yeah.
We have a ton of fun with it. You know, there are obviously some risks associated with any drastic change to a character. But this sort of thing is super fun. You and I, we've both run this sort of thing several times, characters that are really powerful. Characters getting even more power as they get stronger. Stuff can get really fun. Stuff can get really cool. You know, that narrative divine intervention in that episode, that was crazy cool. We were all like you know, everybody was in awe, both in character and we were out of character, as that happened. I was so hyped when that happened. It was so cool. So yeah, this is a really cool thing. If you and your table can handle it, please feel free to go for it, try it, because it doesn't have to end in a horror story. It really doesn't. It can be really cool. And at the end of the day, D&D's fun. This can be really fun to do. If it's not fun, don't keep doing it. So this is a little bit of a shorter one. That's okay.
Basically, just remember, talk to your players.
Yep, keep a dialogue open, communicate, be friends with each other. That's kind of the point. And while we're on the topic of doing things for each other, don't forget to like and subscribe. I know we said at the beginning of the video, I'm going to say it again now. Like this video to show us that you are enjoying it and that you agree with us. If you do agree with us, if you don't agree with us, leave stuff in the comments. If you have a story about how you played an overpowered character or DM'd for an overpowered character, leave it in the comments. We're going to be taking submissions for the Game Tales section of the channel, so if you drop a really cool story, we might steal it for that, with permission, of course, so it's not really stealing.
Yeah, and on our Patreon, subscribe to our Patreon, and you can vote on future topics.
Yeah, you can vote on all sorts of stuff. So yeah, all that said, we love you guys, take care of yourselves, and be sure to check out the rest of our stuff.
Thank you for watching this video from College of Lore. Remember to like this video, subscribe to join the party, and have a fantastic adventure.